I don't know what's going on. He hasn't touched me all week.
He's not affectionate anymore. It's like he's a different person.
I feel like I'm losing him.
Welcome to the Crime Ledger, where every page reveals a mystery.
The sun had barely risen over Frederick, Colorado when a quiet suburban street became the stage for a nightmare. The camera is shaky body cam footage from a police officer called out on a welfare check. On the porch stands a worried friend, Nicole Atkinson, pounding on the door, her voice edged with panic. She's pregnant, she has lupus, she never misses a doctor's appointment. The officer knocks, silence, again nothing. Inside the Watts home the air feels heavy, thick with absence, everything looks ordinary, too ordinary. Shanann's shoes sit by the door, her purse is inside, her phone is on the couch. But what about Shanann herself? And her two little girls, Bella and Celeste? They are gone. And the silence inside that house is the kind of silence that tells you something has gone terribly wrong. To understand why Nicole called so quickly, why she knew something was wrong, you have to understand Shanann. Shanann Watts was 34 years old, a mother of two little girls and 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy they had already named Nico. She was vibrant, driven, and deeply connected to the people around her. Through Facebook, Shanann shared her life openly, videos of Bella singing, Celeste laughing and Chris holding flowers. She posted about her struggles with lupus, her triumphs at work with Thrive, her pride in her family. To friends, Shanann was unstoppable, always on the move, always smiling, always reaching out, and she was meticulous. If she said she'd be somewhere, she was there. If she had an appointment, she showed up. Which is why Nicole knew something was terribly wrong when Shanann didn't answer her phone, didn't show up for her OB appointment and left her car in the garage. Shanann didn't just disappear. Chris Watts was 33, a man neighbors described as polite, quiet, and dependable. He worked long hours at Anadarko Petroleum, providing for his family. If Shanann was the energy in the relationship, Chris was the calm. He wasn't outspoken, rarely shared much of himself online. In Shanann's videos he often looked uncomfortable, arms folded, smiling politely when prodded. But to the outside world they seemed perfect, a young couple, 2 daughters, a baby on the way, a nice home in a safe neighborhood. The image of the American dream, and that's what made what happened next so shocking. The officers stepped inside with Chris trailing behind them, everything felt frozen in time. In the kitchen Shanann's medication sat untouched, on the couch her phone buzzed with unanswered messages, upstairs her suitcase lay half unpacked from a recent trip. And on the dresser, glinting under the dim light, was her wedding ring. To police, to Nicole, to anyone who knew Shanann, the message was clear: she hadn't left willingly. Chris, though, didn't seem panicked. He told officers maybe Shanann went to a friend's, maybe she just needed space. His voice was calm, too calm. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, as officers moved from room to room. It wasn't the reaction of a desperate husband. It was the reaction of a man watching carefully, monitoring, calculating. Within hours the media descended. Standing in his driveway, the house looming behind him, Chris gave an interview that would later be dissected by millions. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. The house is not complete without you. His words said one thing, his body said another. No tears, no urgency, arms folded, eyes shifting, tone flat. He swayed slightly, almost rehearsed. It wasn't the cry of a grieving husband. It was the performance of a man who thought he could convince the world, but not everyone was convinced. Next door, a neighbor offered detectives surveillance footage from his home security camera on the morning of August 13th, the very day Shanann and the girls vanished. The footage showed Chris doing something odd. At 5:27 a.m., he backed his work truck into the garage. Trip after trip, he walked back and forth loading something heavy. The neighbor, standing by the officers as they watched, shook his head. He never does that, something's not right with him. And in that moment, suspicion shifted. The husband wasn't a grieving victim, he was the prime suspect. The investigation had barely begun, but already the cracks in Chris's mask were showing. Shanann's phone, her purse, her medication, all left behind. Chris's odd calmness, his stiff interview, his unusual truck movements, to the police, to the public, to Shanann's family, it was becoming clear, Chris's story didn't add up. And as detectives began pulling phone records, credit card activity and digging into Chris's personal life, the truth was about to explode into the open. The perfect family had vanished, the perfect husband was lying, and the perfect life was about to unravel in the most horrifying way imaginable, because soon detectives would uncover the secret Chris Watts had been hiding, a secret that would reveal his motive. And a secret that would show that behind the mask of a quiet family man was a killer. The neighbor's living room was dim, the hum of the TV in the background. A police officer leaned over the security monitor watching the grainy black and white footage on repeat. The timestamp read 5:27 a.m. August 13th. Chris Watts, in a t-shirt and shorts, moved back and forth between the house and his truck, over and over, lifting, carrying, loading. The truck was backed unusually close to the garage. "Something's off," the neighbor muttered, shaking his head. "He never parks like that, he never loads his truck like that." Chris stood beside him, arms folded, face tight. He laughed awkwardly, trying to deflect, but his eyes told another story. The neighbor glanced at the officer, his voice low. "He's not acting right." It was the first moment Chris Watts's mask slipped in front of everyone. Back at the police station, detectives began piecing together the puzzle. The biggest clue wasn't in the garage or the truck, it was in Shanann's phone. Shanann's phone was her lifeline, her work, her friends, her family. She didn't go an hour without using it. And yet, on the morning of August 13th, it had gone completely silent. No texts, no calls, no Facebook posts. For detectives, this was impossible. Shanann hadn't left her phone voluntarily, and then they found the text messages she had sent to her friends in the days before her disappearance. "I don't know what's going on, he hasn't touched me all week. He's not affectionate anymore, it's like he's a different person. I feel like I'm losing him." The words were heartbreaking and damning. Shanann knew something was wrong. But she never knew how wrong. The missing piece of the puzzle came from Chris's workplace. Detectives learned that Chris wasn't just a quiet husband struggling with his marriage. He was living a double life. Her name was Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum. At first, Nicole believed Chris's story that he was separated, that the marriage was ending, that he was sleeping in the basement until the divorce was final, but it wasn't true. They began a passionate affair, dates, hotels, vacations planned. They searched for apartments together. Chris looked up wedding songs with her. He whispered promises of a new life while Shanann posted glowing tributes to her husband on Facebook. Chris was Googling jewelry for Nicole. To detectives, the motive was now clear. Chris didn't want a divorce, he didn't want custody battles, he didn't want to start over the hard way. He wanted freedom, and he was willing to annihilate his family to get it. On August 15th, detectives invited Chris to take a polygraph test. He agreed, smugly confident he could pass. He sat in a chair, wires strapped to his chest, sensors clipped to his fingers. The examiner's voice was calm, professional. "Do you know where Shanann is?" "No." "Do you know where your children are?" "No." "Did you physically cause their disappearance?" "No." The machine disagreed. The line spiked, his deception blared across the screen. When the test ended, the examiner didn't sugarcoat it. "Chris, this is the absolute truth detector, and guess what? You failed. You didn't just fail, you bombed it." Chris's confidence cracked for the first time. His mask was slipping in real time. Detectives brought Chris into a small interrogation room. The walls were blank, the table bare. Detective Tammy Lee leaned forward, her tone soft but firm. "Chris, we know something happened. This is your chance to tell the truth. Shanann deserves the truth. Your girls deserve the truth." Chris's eyes darted, his breathing quickened. "I didn't hurt them," he whispered. "I didn't hurt Shanann." But the detectives pressed harder. They showed him the polygraph results, they reminded him Shanann's phone was left behind, they asked about Nickel, the walls were closing in. And then, finally Chris cracked. He dropped his head into his hands, his voice trembling. "Yes, I did it." But even then, he clung to another lie. He claimed Shanann had strangled the girls, and in a fit of rage, he killed her. It was grotesque, a coward's attempt to shift the blame. Detectives didn't buy it. And the evidence was about to crush his story completely. Chris's work truck became the key. GPS data showed exactly where it had been on the morning of August 13th, not just in the neighborhood, not just on the road, but at a remote oil site miles away. The same site where Chris worked, the same site where he had backed his truck into the garage and loaded it before dawn. Detectives stared at the map. If Shanann and the girls weren't in the house, they were at that oil site. And what investigators would find there would unravel the last of Chris's lies and reveal a crime so cold, so calculated, it would haunt the nation forever. Chris Watts's mask had slipped, the affair was exposed, the polygraph was failed, the interrogation cracked him, and now, the GPS was pointing the way. Straight to the shallow grave. Straight to the oil tanks. Straight to the truth. The Colorado air was dry, the sky a pale blue stretching over miles of barren land. Tall steel oil tanks rose from the ground like watchtowers, silent witnesses to what lay beneath. On August 15, 2018, investigators drove out to the remote Anadarko petroleum site where Chris's GPS had led them, their boots crunched on gravel as they stepped out, the heat rising from the earth. It was quiet, too quiet for a place that now held the secret of a family's disappearance. They spread out, scanning the ground, and then they saw it. A patch of disturbed earth, a mound of dirt uneven against the flat ground. The digging began, and within moments, the truth broke the surface. Shanann Watts lay in a shallow grave, still wearing the shirt she had traveled in the night before, still carrying her unborn son, Nico. The officers stood in silence, some turned away, others clenched their fists. Even the most hardened investigators weren't prepared for the sight of a pregnant woman, discarded like trash in a field her husband worked at every day. But the horror wasn't finished, because when they checked the tanks they found Bella and Celeste. The openings were narrow, just 8 inches wide, too small for an adult body but for a child just enough. Inside the thick crude oil they found what no one wanted to believe, the small fragile remains of 2 little girls stuffed into separate tanks hidden in darkness. The smell was overwhelming, the sight unbearable. Investigators, men and women who had seen the worst of humanity, wept openly. Bella, Celeste's children who once laughed, played, and sang in the safety of their home, now reduced to evidence in a tank of oil. At the coroner's office the truth became even more horrifying. Shanann had been strangled, bruises around her neck signs she had fought back. Celeste, just 3 years old, had been smothered with her blanket, and Bella, 4 years old, had fought the hardest. She had defensive wounds on her body, her tongue bitten from trying to scream, scratch marks that showed her desperate struggle. Her last word, Chris would later admit, was, "Daddy." Even seasoned pathologists paused as they documented their findings. This wasn't just murder, this was betrayal at its deepest, most primal level. Meanwhile, detectives questioned Nicole Kessinger, Chris's mistress. She was shaken, horrified. She had believed Chris when he said he was separated. She had believed him when he told her the marriage was ending. She had no idea she insisted that he was capable of this. But her phone records revealed another layer of Chris's lies. In the weeks before the murders, he had searched. Can cops trace text messages? How long does it take for someone to decompose? How to prepare for a new relationship after divorce? This wasn't a snap decision, this was premeditation. Chris hadn't wanted to fight for custody or deal with divorce lawyers or admit he was leaving his pregnant wife for another woman. He wanted a clean slate. And his idea of a clean slate was annihilation. Faced with the evidence, the grave, the tanks, the autopsy results, Chris's story collapsed. He could no longer blame Shanann, he could no longer pretend innocence. And yet, when he finally admitted what he had done, his words were chillingly calm. He described killing Shanann in their bedroom, he described loading her body into the truck. He described buckling Bella and Celeste into the back seat alive, sitting beside their dead mother. For 45 minutes, he drove with them. "Daddy, what's wrong with Mom?" He didn't answer. At the oil site he buried Shanann, then turned to his daughters. He smothered Celeste first, then Bella, who begged and fought, screaming, "No, Daddy," until she couldn't anymore. Even recounting it, Chris spoke like he was reading a grocery list, flat, emotionless, as though the horror was nothing more than routine. With the discovery of the bodies and Chris's confession, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to one of the most shocking family annihilation cases in American history. The perfect family man had been unmasked as a cold, calculating killer. The news spread nationwide. Images of Shanann's smiling Facebook videos contrasted against Chris's hollow driveway interview. The betrayal cut deep, not just to Shanann's family, but to a public horrified that a father could do this to his children. The ledger of true crime had a new, unforgettable entry. The world now knew what Chris had done, but there was still the question of justice. What would the courts decide? Would he face death? Or would he live the rest of his days in a cell, haunted by the voices of his wife and children? And when Shanann's family faced him in the courtroom, what would they say to the man who destroyed their world? The courtroom was packed. Rows of journalists, neighbors, and strangers who had followed every headline sat shoulder to shoulder waiting. The air was heavy, not with noise, but with silence. A silence broken only by the shuffle of papers, the occasional cough, the muffled sobs of Shanann's family seated in the front row. And then the door opened. Chris Watts entered, shackled, wearing an orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved, his face pale. He didn't look left or right, he didn't look at Shanann's family, he just stared forward, hollow, as if the world around him didn't exist. This was no longer the smiling man from Shanann's Facebook posts, this was no longer the quiet husband neighbors thought they knew. This was a convicted murderer about to hear the words that would end his life as he knew it. Just weeks earlier, Chris had sat across from his attorneys weighing his options. Colorado had the death penalty at the time and prosecutors were ready to pursue it. The evidence was overwhelming: Shanann's grave, Bella and Celeste's bodies in the oil tanks, Chris's GPS records, his failed polygraph, his mistress's testimony. Chris had no chance of acquittal. To avoid the death penalty, he struck a deal. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts pled guilty to all charges. 5 counts of first-degree murder, including one for Shanann and one for each child, with an additional count for killing a child under 12. 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy. 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body. As the judge read the charges, Chris answered in a flat voice, "Guilty, Your Honor." No tears, no hesitation, no emotion. It was the end of the legal battle, but for Shanann's family, the emotional battle was only beginning. When the judge opened the floor for victim impact statements, Shanann's family rose, their grief raw and unfiltered. Her father, Frank Rzusek, stepped to the podium, his voice cracked as he spoke. "My daughter was the most beautiful soul you could ever meet. She was full of love, full of life, and she loved those girls more than anything in the world. I will never understand why you did this. I will never understand how you could take them from us." Her brother, Frankie, trembled as he read his statement, tears running down his face. "You took away my sister, my nieces, my unborn nephew. You destroyed our family. You are a monster and you deserve nothing." And then Shanann's mother, Sandy, stood, her words silenced the courtroom. "You are evil, Chris. I trusted you to take care of my daughter and my grandchildren and instead, you killed them. You broke all of our hearts, but I still have to forgive you because if I don't forgive I will be consumed by hate. And I refuse to let you take any more from me." The room was in tears, even the judge paused, visibly shaken by the family's grief. Chris never looked at them. On November 19, 2018, Judge Marcelo Kopkow delivered his ruling. Chris Watts would serve 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Plus 48 years for unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy. Plus 36 years for tampering with the bodies. "Mr. Watts," the judge said firmly, "the court cannot imagine a more serious set of crimes. Nothing less than the maximum sentence is appropriate." The gavel struck, and just like that, Chris Watts's life outside prison ended. The world was watching. The story had dominated headlines for months, but the courtroom footage, Chris's emotionless face, Shanann's family's anguish, the judge's harsh words turned this case into one of the most infamous in true crime history. People debated endlessly. Was Chris a cold-blooded psychopath? Or a weak man who chose annihilation over honesty? Could anyone have predicted this? Documentaries soon followed, news specials dissected the timeline, psychologists weighed in on Chris's flat effect and chilling calm. And through it all, Shanann's family tried to reclaim the narrative, reminding the world of who Shanann was, who Bella and Celeste were, who Nico should have been. They were more than victims, they were lives stolen by a man who couldn't face the truth. After sentencing, Chris was transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. The move was secretive, done for his own protection, because even among criminals, family killers are despised. There, in a small cell, Chris began his new life. A life of isolation. A life of silence. But that silence wouldn't last, because soon, letters would begin arriving in his cell, letters from strangers, from admirers. From women who claimed to love him. And Chris, who once lied to everyone around him, began to write back. And in those letters, he would confess details more horrifying than anything he had admitted in court. The courtroom gave the world closure, the sentencing gave Shanann's family justice. But the story of Chris Watts was far from over. Because in prison, with nothing left to lose, he would finally tell the truth, and the truth was darker than anyone imagined. The footage is grainy but steady, the lens of a police officer's body camera, the timestamp, August 13, 2018, we see the porch, we hear Nicole Atkinson, Shanann's friend, her voice tight with panic as she tells officers, she's pregnant, she never misses an appointment, something's wrong. The door opens, the officer steps inside, and for the first time the world sees the Watts home, not through Facebook smiles or family photos, but through the cold, unflinching eye of a police camera. What unfolds is ordinary, too ordinary. The couch, the blanket, the phone buzzing on the cushion, Shanann's purse, her medications, the children's toys scattered across the floor, it's a house frozen in time. But the silence inside makes it feel wrong. Not just empty, vacant, haunted. When police walked through the Watts home that day, they didn't know they were recording one of the most infamous true crime videos of the decade. They moved from room to room, narrating what they saw. Her purse is here. Keys are here. Phone still on the couch. In Shanann's bedroom, her suitcase lay open, clothes folded neatly inside. On her nightstand, her wedding ring sparkled faintly in the dim light. Everything she needed for life, her phone, her medicine, her ID was there, everything except her. And through it all, Chris stood in the background, arms folded, rocking on his heels, his calm too steady for a man whose wife and children had just vanished. The officer's camera follows Chris down to the basement, the frame tilts, capturing the unfinished cement floor, the dim light casting long shadows. Chris casually points to the area where he says he's been sleeping, but detectives would later speculate that this was more than a sleeping space, it was a staging ground. It was here Chris may have rehearsed his story, it was here he may have planned how to move Shanann's body, how to load the truck, how to erase his crime. In the footage, The basement looks ordinary, but when you know what happened, it feels like the darkest room in the house. When the body cam footage was released publicly, viewers noticed something else. In one clip, as the camera pans across a bedroom, a faint child's giggle can be heard, but no children were alive in that house anymore. In another moment, a shadow seems to dart across the stairs. Some viewers claim they heard a faint whisper, "Daddy." Theories exploded online. Paranormal investigators called the house haunted, skeptics dismissed it as audio glitches, shadows, tricks of the mind, but thousands of viewers swore the same thing: the house was speaking. The voices of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste lingered, refusing to be silenced. After Chris's arrest, the house at 2825 Saratoga Trail became infamous. On the outside, it looked like any other home in the neighborhood: white siding, brick trim, a neatly kept lawn. But on the inside, it was a tomb. No one wanted to buy it. The bank foreclosed. For years, it sat empty, windows reflecting the quiet street, walls holding the echoes of a family that should have been safe. Neighbors avoided looking directly at it, some crossed the street when walking by. Children whispered about ghosts in the windows. The perfect family home had become a symbol of horror. Experts say that crime scenes carry what they call psychological residue. Even after the evidence is collected, even after the furniture is cleaned, the weight of what happened remains. The Watts home carried that weight: the vacuum lines in the carpet, the folded laundry, the little girl's bedrooms decorated in pink and pastels. Everything neat, everything normal, except for the absence. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was a place permanently stained by betrayal. The Watts house became more than evidence, it became a reminder. A reminder that evil doesn't always break down doors. Sometimes, it kisses you goodnight. A reminder that horror doesn't always look like blood on the walls. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet man loading his truck at dawn. A reminder that the scariest houses aren't the ones abandoned in the woods, they're the ones that look just like yours. And though the case had moved on to prison and sentencing, the Saratoga Trail house remained silent, unsold, haunted by memory. But the house wasn't the only thing that wouldn't stay quiet. Behind bars, Chris Watts had begun to write letters that described his crimes in chilling detail. Letters that showed he hadn't just snapped, he had planned, and those letters would reveal the darkest truths yet. The steel door slammed shut, and the echo carried down the sterile hallways of Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Chris Watts shuffled inside his new cell, concrete walls, a steel bed bolted to the floor, a toilet in the corner. This was where he would spend the rest of his life. 5 life sentences, plus decades more. No neighbors to wave at, no Facebook perfect images of his family, no double life to maintain. Just the silence of a man who had destroyed everything he once pretended to be. But while his world shrank to a cell, the world outside never let go, because the story of Chris Watts didn't end with sentencing. It took on a new disturbing life behind prison walls. The first flood of mail came quickly. Some letters were venomous. "You're a monster. Burn in hell. You'll never be forgiven." They came from strangers across the country, people who had never met Shanann, Belle, Nico, but who felt the betrayal as if it had happened next door. Chris read them quietly. He rarely responded. But not every letter was filled with hate. Shockingly, disturbingly, some letters carried words of admiration. Women wrote to him, sometimes teenagers, sometimes married mothers, offering sympathy, affection, even love. "You're misunderstood. I believe you're not as bad as they say. I'd like to take care of you." Some sent photographs, some wrote long, romantic notes. It wasn't new. Ted Bundy had received marriage proposals. Richard Ramirez had married on death row. Psychologists call it hyperstophilia, attraction to violent criminals. But watching it happen to Chris Watts, a man who had murdered his pregnant wife and children, was grotesque. And yet, he wrote back, in neat handwriting. Chris responded to some of these women. His words were calm, measured, almost polite. I know I don't deserve kindness, but your letters give me peace. I feel God has forgiven me, I pray every day. He presented himself not as a killer but as a man searching for redemption. Even in prison, Chris was manipulating, still crafting a mask, still shaping the story, but in other letters, especially those to author Sherilyn Cadle, his mask slipped. In his correspondence with Cadle, Chris admitted details that horrified even seasoned investigators. He wrote that he had thought about the murders for weeks, that he had tried to give Shanann oxycodone to induce a miscarriage, that the night before the murders he had lain awake rehearsing what he would do, and he admitted what no one had been certain of until then: Bella and Celeste were alive in the truck that morning. They saw their mother's body wrapped in a sheet. They asked questions. Bella whispered, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris didn't answer. For 45 minutes, he drove with his daughters sitting feet away from their dead mother, and when he reached the oil site, he killed them one by one. Celeste first, smothered with her blanket. Then Bella, who fought back, crying, "No, Daddy," until her voice was gone. Even recounting it, Chris wrote in flat, detached sentences, like someone describing a chore, and perhaps the most chilling line of all: "I felt relief once it was over." While Chris's letters horrified many, they only fueled more obsession. Women who read his words saw not a monster, but a man they could heal. They wrote more, sometimes competing for his attention. It was a grotesque cycle: murder fueling notoriety, notoriety fueling fascination, and Chris, who once lied to his wife, his mistress, his neighbors, his co-workers, continued to craft a version of himself that suited whoever was listening. Experts studying the case said Chris wasn't insane, he wasn't delusional. He was selfish, calculating, weak. He wanted freedom without conflict, a new life without divorce court. He didn't want the inconvenience of his family existing, so he erased them. His letters confirmed that they weren't the words of a man who snapped, they were the words of a man who decided. Inside Dodge Correctional, Chris lived under protective custody. Child killers are the lowest rung in prison society. Other inmates threatened him. Guards monitored him closely. So Chris lived in silence. He read the Bible. He prayed. He wrote letters. He worked small prison jobs, blending into routine, and at night he claimed he dreamed of Shanann and the girls. He told Cadle he sometimes saw them at the foot of his bed, Bella laughing, Celeste giggling, Shanann staring silently. Were they dreams of guilt? Or just another manipulation for sympathy? No one could say for certain. Chris's prison years revealed something darker than his courtroom silence. They revealed that he wasn't haunted by guilt, he was haunted by exposure. He wanted to control the narrative. To be seen as remorseful, as forgiven, as pitied. But his own words betrayed him. His letters showed calculation, relief, selfishness, and the world saw through it. Because nothing, not prayer, not forgiveness, not fan mail, could erase Bella's last words. "Daddy, no." By 2019, investigators thought they knew everything, but then came a new chapter, one last interrogation, this time in prison. Chris agreed to walk through the timeline in full, detail by detail, and those tapes, his flat voice, his hollow words, his step-by-step account of annihilation would become some of the most chilling confessions ever recorded. The room was plain: a table, 2 chairs, a recorder on the desk. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. On February 18, 2019, FBI agents and Colorado detectives sat across from Chris Watts inside Dodge Correctional. The trial was over. The sentence was sealed. Chris had nothing left to lose, and yet, the world still wanted answers. What happened in those final hours? Why did Bella and Celeste have to die? Was Shanann awake when he killed her? For the first time, Chris would give a full account, and what came out of his mouth would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. Chris began with August 12, 2018. Shanann had just returned from a work trip. He pretended to be asleep as she crawled into bed, unaware he was rehearsing what he would do before sunrise. By early morning, Shanann confronted him. She accused him of being distant. She asked if he still loved her. She asked if he even wanted the baby. I told her I didn't, Chris said, his voice flat. She said I'd never see the kids again. That's when I did it. He climbed on top of her and pressed his hands around her throat. She didn't fight much, he added. I thought maybe she knew what was happening. Detectives exchanged glances. His tone was emotionless, like a man describing fixing a pipe, not murdering his pregnant wife. After Shanann was dead, Chris wrapped her body in a sheet. And then the horror he had always avoided admitting. He revealed that Bella and Celeste woke up. Daddy, what's wrong with Mommy? Bella asked. Her eyes wide, her voice small. She saw her mother's body. She didn't understand. Chris didn't answer. He just carried on. He loaded Shanann's body into the back of his truck. He buckled Bella and Celeste into the back seat. And then he drove. For 45 minutes, those little girls sat feet away from their dead mother. For 45 minutes, they trusted their father, and for 45 minutes, Chris drove in silence, knowing exactly what he was about to do. At the barren Anadarko oil site, Chris pulled the truck to a stop. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave. Then he turned to Celeste. She had her blanket, he said quietly. I used it to smother her. Her small body fought weakly. And when she was still, he carried her to the tank and forced her through the narrow opening. Then he turned to Bella. She knew what was happening, he admitted. She said, No, Daddy. She fought harder. Her tongue bore the marks of her last desperate screams. Her small hands clawed against him. But he pressed down anyway. Her last word, Chris confirmed, was again. Daddy. Even the agents, hardened by decades of interrogations, later admitted they had to pause the tape when they reviewed it. Bella's voice haunted them. What stunned detectives wasn't just the content, it was the delivery. Chris spoke without tears. Without tremors in his voice. Without emotion, he detailed the murders like he was reciting a schedule. It wasn't confession. It was narration. As though he had separated himself from the horror, or worse, as though he didn't see horror in it at all. When news of the confession tapes broke, the public revisited the courtroom footage. They replayed the moment Chris pled guilty in November 2018. The camera showed Shanann's mother sobbing openly, her father clutching her hand, her brother shaking with rage. And Chris? Expressionless, blank. His voice soft as he answered the judge. Guilty, Your Honor. He didn't look at Shanann's family. He didn't flinch at their words. He didn't apologize. The contrast between the family's devastation and Chris's hollow demeanor only deepened the horror. When the tapes were released, true crime communities erupted. Viewers dissected every frame. Was Chris dissociating? Was he a psychopath? Or was this just cowardice, a man so hollow he couldn't even perform remorse? Podcasts analyzed his tone, documentaries replayed Bella's last words, and the question that echoed louder than any other was simple and impossible. Why? Why kill Shanann instead of leaving? Why kill Bella and Celeste instead of letting them live? Why destroy everything for an affair that ended anyway? The confession tapes answered the how. But they never answered the why. The Chris Watts tapes are among the most chilling confessions in modern true crime. Not because they reveal something supernatural or shocking, but because they are so ordinary. A man, sitting in a chair, calmly explaining how he strangled his pregnant wife and smothered his daughters. No rage, no breakdown, just cold narration, and that ordinariness is what makes it unbearable. Because it shows that sometimes, evil doesn't arrive with fury. Sometimes, it whispers in flat tones, wearing the face of a man who looked just like your neighbor. The tapes closed one chapter, but outside the prison, another story was unfolding. The Watts house still stood on Saratoga Trail, silent, unsold, infamous. Neighbors whispered it was haunted. Paranormal groups claimed the bodycam footage revealed whispers, shadows, voices. The crime scene itself became part of the legend, and in Part 8, we close the ledger, with the haunting legacy of the Watts murders, the obsession they left behind, and the unsettling truth that some houses, some families, never rest. The house at 2825 Saratoga Trail still stands. White siding. Brick trim. A porch where Shanann once filmed videos of her daughters playing. But the laughter is gone. The windows are dark. The house is empty, neighbors walk past quickly, some see. Others whisper about flickering lights, strange noises, shadows in the windows. It's no longer a home, it's a monument. Not to life but to the horror that ended it. In Pinehurst, North Carolina, Shanann's family grieves not just for her, but for Bella, Celeste, and Nico. Her father, Frank, breaks down each time he speaks about his daughter. Her brother, Frankie, lashes out online, furious at the obsession with Chris instead of remembrance for Shanann. Her mother, Sandy, offers forgiveness, not for Chris, but for her own survival. If I don't forgive, hate will consume me. And I won't let him take anything more from us. They fight to keep Shanann's legacy alive. To remind the world that she wasn't just a victim of a headline. She was a mother who lived with passion, a wife who loved deeply, a woman who deserved to grow old. The case doesn't fade. It explodes. Netflix's American Murder, The Family Next Door becomes one of the platform's most watched documentaries. Podcasts dedicate entire seasons to dissecting the story. YouTube fills with breakdowns of bodycam footage, driveway interviews, courtroom tapes. Millions around the world become armchair detectives, pausing video frames, analyzing Chris's body language, rereading Shanann's final texts. It isn't just morbid curiosity. It's the desperate search for an answer to the question that lingers: why? But no matter how many times people replay the footage, the answer never comes. Chris Watts' name is now etched into the ledger of family annihilators, men who erase their families in pursuit of freedom, selfishness, or new lives. John List, Neil Entwistle, Robert Farquharson, and now Chris Watts. They don't kill in rage, they kill in calculation, they don't explode, they erase. Chris fit the archetype perfectly, a man who wanted to escape responsibility, who didn't want divorce, who didn't want custody battles, who didn't want to appear as the villain leaving his family. So he chose annihilation. And in that choice, he became something worse than a killer. He became a symbol of betrayal at its deepest level, the father who kills, the husband who strangles, the protector who becomes executioner. Today, Chris lives in silence at Dodge Correctional. He reads the Bible, he writes letters, he avoids other inmates who despise him. He has no future, no freedom, no family. Sometimes, in his letters, he claims he dreams of Shanann and the girls. That he sees Bella running, Celeste giggling, Shanann staring. Are they dreams of guilt? Or just another manipulation to elicit sympathy? No one knows, and maybe, it doesn't matter. Because whatever peace Chris claims to find in God or forgiveness, the truth is carved in stone, for caskets in Pinehurst, North Carolina, and an unborn child who never took his first breath. The Watts home is still unsold. Its walls carry whispers, its rooms hold echoes of lives erased. For some, it's haunted by spirits, for others, haunted by memory. But in either case, it stands. Thanks for watching, like, share, and subscribe.